We dash through European art from the Renaissance to Rodin. Before we dive into modernism and postmodernism, we're going to take a look at our last major category of non-Western art, the art of the Americas. And we are going to approach this unit the way we did Africa and the Pacific. Today I will try to identify some big themes in each of these three major regions, Mesoamerica, Andean South America, and Indigenous North America. Then you get to introduce these cultures and lead a discussion of our required works. I'm not going to try to read this slide. You already have the handout. Do not try to give us a full encyclopedia account of your culture. Instead, think about the themes that tend to show up in art and on the AP Art History exam. What is the culture's religion, its beliefs and its practices, and how does art and architecture reflect and promote this religion? Who is in power, and how does art reinforce that power and authority? What is the social structure, including family structure and the role of women? And how is this social structure represented and again reinforced in art? What is the culture's natural environment, and how does this affect the content of its art? What kind of materials are available to the culture, and what kind of social or religious significance does their use convey? Again, you have a handout. Be careful to select questions from different categories to create variety in your presentation. Now, I'm not going to reproduce the full cultural context essay questions list here. Again, you have a handout. Note, these are old cultural context questions, but they reflect abiding College Board themes. What you want to keep in mind as you prepare essay answers is that your analysis needs to include at least as much information about the culture as it does about the work. Remember, the best way to run faster than those other deer is to demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of context. So, what I'd like to do now is give a very brief intro to the cultures. Providing more detail is your job, and tease out some of the important themes that we will explore across this unit. Well, I haven't made much secret of my irritation with the College Board's ever-proliferating enduring understandings, essential knowledges, etc. I find them wordy and not always well connected to the images. But as you're about to bombard yourselves and each other with information about these cultures, it's smart to hone in on the themes that tie these works together and clue us into what the College Board wants us all to learn. I have included the College Board's essential knowledge for this unit in your workbooks. I've also included this list of enduring understandings, so don't start scribbling away. I think you'll see many parallels with themes we explored when looking at the art of Africa and the Pacific. So let me just throw out a few comparisons. What do these works obviously have in common, and what would you guess they might have in common? Well, what's obvious is that both are made of feathers, colorful, exotic, and difficult to obtain. But they also carry with them the imagery of birds, their ability to fly, their keen eyesight and viewpoint high above the land and closer to the gods. Religion and nature are closely intertwined in the Pacific and American cultures. And remember, too, that birds fly between the earthly and heavenly realms. The multiple colors of the Aztec headdress also attest to the empire's wide trading network, another big theme with the College Board. The birds that supplied the feathers came from different regions of Mesoamerica. So what do you remember about the work on the left? What would you guess it would have in common with the work on the right, which is a Mexica codex? Both of these works use iconography and the careful placement of materials or images to tell a story about a history of ruling dynasties and conquest. What is the work on the bottom? You see two images from an earlier unit, and what might it have in common with the images on top? Well, they're both royal residences. What do you notice about the difference in the way the stone is worked? Both architectural complexes use dressed stone, that means carved and shaped, but Great Zimbabwe stones are largely regular, whereas the Inca stones fit together like an elaborate but irregular jigsaw. The fit is amazingly close, yet allows enough wiggle room to help the building survive earthquakes. Stay tuned. Note that this Maya site shows still another stoneworking technique. The top of this Mayan temple is called a roof comb. So what might be a functional advantage of building up this way? Well, the space between the stones lightens the walls and enables them to go higher. One of the works I consulted described the roof comb this way. They're like fancy headdresses for buildings, increasing the apparent height, proclaiming power, and grabbing attention. Headdresses featured prominently in the ruling elite's wardrobes as well. Mesoamerican cultures did not use the arch. The basic structure was post and lintel, think Stonehenge. They also didn't use columns, even though carved stelae or pillars were very important historical and artistic documentation of rulers. So what effect would this structural approach have on the interior? Well, buildings constructed this way would necessarily be small and dark, inner sanctums for gods, rather like the garbhagriha of a Hindu temple. Elaborate public ceremonies, religious and political combined, would take place outside the temples, which is easy enough in warm climates. Remember that this was true of Greek temples as well. So, what might these two works have in common? The work on the left should give you a clue. Both works convey a ruler's status. What's especially intriguing about the work on the right, which is Mayan, is that a woman, a ruler's wife, is helping reinforce her husband's status through an elaborate vision that comes from ritual bloodletting. Again, stay tuned. Can you think of another work from our Africa unit that showcases the important role that wives play in supporting rulers? I find it intriguing that in the Yoruba work, the senior wife is actually portrayed as larger than the king. So what similarity might I be getting at here? The works are both examples of art that is used in performance. The Aka elephant mask was used in a special dance and signified a divine king who could transform into an elephant. The transformation mask on the left was worn by the Kwakiutl people of the northwest coast of Canada, and it too was worn over the head as part of a complete body costume. During a ritual performance, the wearer opens and closes the mask, revealing the face of an ancestor. Think about shamanism, or the connection with the spirit world through transformation into an animal or spirit. That is a common theme in much of the art of the indigenous Americas, and it's a favorite College Board topic. So here are a couple more summary slides. In earlier units, we've seen many architectural works that are oriented in the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. Think of the pyramids, for example. But in the art of the Americas, the center is often just as important spatially as north, south, east, or west. Think of the axis mundi, another concept we've encountered before, an axis that connects Earth with the underworld and with the heavens. In the art of Americas, the spirit world is often subterranean, with tunnels and caves connecting the everyday world to the abodes of gods and spirits. So, any guesses what parallel I might be drawing here? The work on the bottom right should give you a big hint. Many cultures use art and architecture to provide astronomical guides that celebrate the cycle of life and signal times to plant and to harvest. The art of Mesoamerica in particular developed the calendar to a high art. The work on the left is actually a calendar stone. Note, too, how often the art of the Americas combines animal and human images, which may attest, again, to shamanistic rituals of transformation and may associate human rulers and or gods with the power of specific animals. What do you remember about the jade Kong? Well, that face seems to have both human and animal features. This is a prehistoric work, so we just have to guess. But I'm struck that these faces are surprisingly similar to works that appeared in the art of the Americas. The ceramic figure on the bottom, not a required work, depicts the Mexica or Aztec god Tlaloc, the god of rain and earthly fertility. By the way, I'm not suggesting that these cultures had contact with each other, but again, we see themes that cross cultures. One way that form sometimes reinforces this message of transformation so central to shamanism is a technique called contour rivalry. An image may be viewed as depicting one figure when viewed in a certain way, but if the image is flipped or turned, the same lines that formed the previous image now make up an entirely new design or figure. So here's an example from the Andean culture of Chavan de Huantar, which frequently used this technique. By contrast, note that the jade Kong was designed so that the design persisted even when the object was turned over. The Chinese were very big on continuity. Contour rivalry in the art of the Americas signals a fascination with transformation or change. Your fellow students will share lots of information about the politics in the individual cultural presentations. The point I want to make here is that we will encounter significant differences in political structure in this unit. The Aztecs and Inca created large empires through military conquest and established elaborate networks of tribute and trade. Mayan city-states traded and warred with each other, but like the Greeks before Philip and Alexander, they were organized into rival city-states. In North America, we see no empires, although there's a great deal we don't know about earlier Anasazi and Hopewell cultures. But none of these societies practiced the separation of church and state, religion and state. Political power was always reinforced by spiritual authority, and especially in Mesoamerica, by tying rulers to each society's creation story. And with that, I'm going to move on to the three big geographical cultural areas: Mesoamerica, Andean South America, and North America. So let's start with the area usually called Mesoamerica, areas we now know as Mexico and Central America. We're going to look at two sites: Yaxchilan on the border between Mexico and Guatemala, and circled here in purple was one of the many Mayan city-states. This one reached its height in the 8th century, which is during what archaeologists call the Mayan Classic period. Tenochtitlan, circled in red, is the Aztec capital, now Mexico City. The Aztec Empire was at its height in the early 16th century when Tenochtitlan was captured by the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés. And just to make our lives more confusing, one of the works from Tenochtitlan is actually a prized artifact from a much earlier culture. We're talking 1200 to 400 BCE here. That culture is the Olmec, whose center was east and south of the Aztec capital, and I've circled that area in blue. For this work, we will need to consider both how this work reflects Olmec culture, what we know of it, and also why this artifact was so highly prized by the Aztecs that they placed it in their central temple in a place of honor. Let me just note that their proximity notwithstanding, the Maya and Aztec cultures developed in very different geographical settings. Aztec territory was Mexico's high, dry central plain. The Mayan city-states were mostly built in what today is rainforest, and reclaiming these sites from the jungle, in fact, is one of archaeologists' many challenges in understanding these works. This great diversity notwithstanding, there are certain characteristics that we see across Mesoamerican cultures, in part because they influenced each other across both time and geographical space. Again, I strongly recommend that you review the information from the College Board course description that I have included in your workbooks. Again, I don't plan to preempt presentations. Consider this a teaser. Some sighting scenes, as we used to say when I was a kid. The Olmec culture had a highly stratified society with hereditary roles and a priestly class. And a priestly class. These colossal ruler portraits are not a required work, but they're probably the culture's most famous artifacts. And it's thought that they portray rulers rather than deities, because the features seem more individual than generic. And this suggests they might have been real people, except, that is, for the green statue, which is a jaguar human. Sound intriguing? More animal-human mixing. Again, many of these cultures created images of creatures that were both man and beast. Why? What might that say about this culture's religion and relationship to nature? This map shows some of the major Mayan sites and reinforces that the Mayans lived in separate city-states. They never developed a central empire. Our required work comes from just one of these sites. I'm going to show you some Mayan works that aren't on the list, but that I think tell us interesting things about this culture. So, in the 20th and 21st centuries, what great temples do people build? What places are mass ceremonies of bloody sacrifice performed? Football stadiums, of course. This is a ball court, but this ball game makes the NFL look sissy. Most ball games were recreational, but at least some ended in human sacrifice. Mesoamerican cultures saw the ball and its movement in the court as paralleling the movement of heavenly bodies in the sky. The game was viewed as a battle between the sun against the moon and stars, representing the principles of lightness and darkness. If a particular game had religious meaning, the losing team could be sacrificed, or maybe it was the winning team. Archaeologists are still arguing about that one. In illustrations from pre-Columbian books and carved stone friezes decorating the walls of Mayan ball courts, we see one team captain, or sometimes a priest, decapitating the other team captain. One of the most important episodes in the Popol Vuh, the Mayan creation myth, mentions two sets of important Mayan gods going down into the underworld to contest with the gods of the underworld. Afterwards, they are killed and transformed into celestial bodies. The Aztec creation myth likewise involves gods sacrificing themselves to force the sun to move and to produce time and history. These sacrifices were reenacted in public ceremonies, often with actual human victims. So here's one of the many sculptures of Mayan ball players. Note the protective dress. Those rubber balls were very, very hard. Our image set includes only one pyramid from the Templo Mayor, and it's an imaginative reconstruction. But pyramids were a major feature of Mesoamerican art. Here's what the College Board course description has to say. Mesoamerican pyramids began as early earthworks, changed to 9-level structures with single temples. If you count the levels here, you will see that there are 9, and later became structures with twin temples. So, why did cultures build pyramids? These people would have had no contact with the Sumerians or ziggurat fame or with Egyptian pharaohs. Well, pyramids reach for the heavens. They are a relatively easy shape to build since a heavier, wider bottom supports and distributes weight, and they look like mountains. Here's our required image, a reconstruction drawing. Note that Mesoamerican pyramids were usually step pyramids with temples on top, more akin to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia than to the pyramids of ancient Egypt. But they did serve as burial structures as well as platforms for ceremonials performed in the temples, high up where the crowds assembling in the plazas could see them. The stairs played an especially interesting role in the Templo Mayor. Stay tuned. If you have time, this History Channel clip gives a good introduction to the Mayan pyramids that don't appear on our list. We also don't have any Mayan murals on the list, but this is one of the most famous, from Bonampak in the Chiapas province of Mexico. Note that the sacrifice is taking place at the top of the stepped pyramid. But it wasn't just captives whose blood was shed. Here we see the king performing a bloodletting ceremony before battle. The ancient Maya used spines from stingrays and cacti as well as obsidian knives to pierce their ears, tongues, and genitals to spill their blood for sacrifice. Sorry guys, blood from the penis was especially valued. Why, would you think? Women of the royal family also performed these rituals. This carved image is part of a grouping with our required image. Our required image shows the vision the queen has after the bloodletting. Note that Maya carved murals combined writing and images. And just to show you the Maya culture wasn't all about ball games and blood, here is a mural depicting musicians. We're skipping over several important Mesoamerican cultures and come to the Aztecs. This culture actually creeped out as Mexican conquerors. Do you remember why? On the right, we see the moon goddess being dismembered. I'll leave it to the presenter to tell the story and to explain what we can learn about Aztec culture from this image. On the left, we see a beheaded goddess with serpents coming out of the stump of her neck and another emerging from between her legs. Death and new life merge. It's an important theme in Aztec culture and further evidence of duality in Mesoamerican culture. This and the following set of works are from a temple commemorating the god's victory over his sister and 400 brothers. It would be interesting to draw a comparison between this and the founding myth of the Greek pantheon, which also involved family members killing each other. Well, there is obviously a lot more I could say about Mesoamerica, but we need to move on to South America, specifically cultures that emerged in western South America along the Andes. Actually, this area has a complex ecosystem that includes desert plains near the ocean, different levels of mountain microclimates, and the rainforest to the east. Many of the religious traditions in the Andes actually seem to have come from the Amazon, and widespread trading connected these regions under the Inca. I'm running out of time, but just a few comments. Note the critical role of textiles, and therefore women who often produce textiles. Textiles often imitate other art and cultures, but in Andean American art seems to imitate textile design. Textile designs tend to be geometric and linear, partly because artists were working with low thread count, heavy wool, and cotton, which is harder to work into non-linear designs. Finally, note that the mythology draws heavily on jaguars, eagles, and serpents, which some archaeologists identify as an Amazonian cosmology adopted by cultures far from the Amazon. This is our earliest Andean culture. This work is not on the AP list, which baffles me a little since it seems to be the most famous Chauvin artifact. But let me just note that the figures on the stela are once again composites. They combine feline, avian, reptilian, and human figures. The Inca come along much later. They were, above all, extraordinary architects and engineers. I visited Machu Picchu a few years ago. We hiked in, and this is what we saw as we arrived at one of the sacred gates. It was amazing. Here are just a few more Inca works. Note the meticulous work in precious metals and the complex geometric patterns. Okay, we really are running out of time. And we're also getting to cultures that will mostly be represented by one work and one presenter. But you should see some similar themes emerging. Portrayal of ritual, shamanistic transformation of men into man-beasts, artistic depictions of history, and elaborate public architecture that was designed to promote spiritual and political unity. Here's the College Board's list of themes. They are all reproduced in your workbooks. That is more than enough for now. Good luck with your presentations, and we're getting closer to the finish line.